Well, first question will be, can you tell us your name and tell us what you do?
My name's James Shepherd. I'm the development director of the Cambridge studio. It's Sony Cambridge, so I'm part of the kind of global games development community that works for Sony. And my last project was that I was responsible for was Heavenly Sword on PlayStation 3.
Okay. All right. Well, just going straight into it, right? What do you think? This is just a guess at it. You don't have to know the answer to this, but what do you think the average person thinks HD is? What do you think HD is, and what do you think the average person thinks the high definition is?
Well, for me personally, as I'm the development director, I deal equally with like the creative side of things and the production side of things. So my fundamental job is to get something brilliant for a certain date. Yeah. And so for me personally, in that kind of looking at like in that kind of angle, HD at once for me is something that's potentially fascinating, potentially brilliant, and really the first time I've had a clear window on my worlds, and I can explain that a bit later. And from the production side of things, it is something that brings with it some difficulties. You know, it's one of the major indicators of how the games industry has grown, and as we've grown, we've had little kind of headaches and stumblings along the way, mostly to do with, and it's all to do with the increase in complexity. And the more complexity we have, the more infrastructure we need. And in the last couple of years, with the advent of HD for us, in terms of us making entertainment and art that fits into that format, it's been a logistical readjustment. It's the best way of saying it. A pain in the arse if you wanted it to be kind of brutal. For the general public, I don't think at the moment it has the same kind of resonance as the shift from VHS to DVD did. And the reason I say that is because we reiterate with our machines every 5 years, PlayStation 2 followed PlayStation 1 right at the cusp when VHS was moving to DVD. And for the first kind of like, for the first year, millions of people bought the PlayStation 2 because it was a cheap DVD player rather than the games. And you could just see it was that moment, that tipping point culturally where people were just kind of like, yeah, actually, I'm sick of that. This is clearly much better. And it mirrored the time for us when we went from 2D to 3D with our games. It was a massive, you know, exponential change in the experience, and people went, wow, my God. I think generally we're about maybe a year away, 6 months at the very least, before HD kind of tips over on people. I don't think in many people's mind there's quite that quantum leap from VHS to DVD. You know, there isn't that leap from DVD to HD, Blu-ray, high-definition DVDs. And one of the things is that, like, I think just speaking operationally and kind of dryly, the kind of like the installed user base for Bravia is, do you know what I mean? It's ahead in the States. We're slightly behind. So I think we're a year away from people really being able to see the difference and the benefits. And sometimes, like for us, like PlayStation 3, it scales up DVDs anyway. So if you get a very good DVD transfer, stick it into your PlayStation 3, scale it up to 1080, it looks really, really good. And if you get a Blu-ray, which is going to cost you like, you know, £5 more than a DVD, the difference is not as marked as other kind of like technical transitions we've been through in the last kind of 10, 15 years. But I think it is coming. I think when you see...
So you're talking, it's interesting because you're talking about it in terms of a moment of change. And you talked about a clear window. Can you go into that, a clear window?
Clear window. What did I mean? When did I say that? Sorry.
At the beginning, you were talking about it presented. I was really interested in that. It presented a clear, first time, a clear window to you.
Yeah. Well, games have been growing, and you know, in the beginning, you had one man, a simple machine, very simple code, and you had pixels, and so like everything was built as a symbol, a representation. And you know, like Mario, he was a plumber because you know, his face could be done with a moustache accurately in like one block, one unit of color. And so everything was symbolic. and then your screen had a certain resolution that you could support, how many pixels you could put on the screen, what you could make your characters, how you could define them, and how many pixels you could put on the screen. And then that changed, and we went from 2D to 3D. But even then, if I was modelling you in a game, the whole art of it would be, how can I model your brilliant craggy face in like 50 polys, which is just like a flat shape. And so it was all about like getting representation, even then with great economy, yeah. And even then, after I'd got your face with my 50 polys, and you look like like you carved brutally out of stone. Even then, I could only throw so many lines onto the screen because of the processing power. So you'd have these things that were kind of like quite crude representations, and then on top of that, you'd have the number of pixels you could show on the screen. And so, like, you'd be jaggy, and you know what I mean, and it would be looking, it would be like when you look at like someone's face when they've been JPEG'd, and you're just looking at the pixels and you're trying to work out what it was. And so you'd be looking like that, and it's one of the reasons why some of the early 2D games look better than the early 3D games that came later, because it just the image would not hold together. And you could see moments where games were trying to emulate films, and they'd have some kind of fantastic opening credit sequence. But you'd be looking through this, and so it's like the mosaic has been wiped off the glass, and you can see everything really as clear as you would want. Which again has like 1,000 resultant problems for us. I think much more so than any other medium, because if I make a symbol of you, and you're basically just some pixels, just a few simple shapes, and games are about immersion, they're about input. And I want you to move to the other side of the room, and I press the button, and those little bunch of pixels just goes tip to the jump bunch shape, and just goes bonk, and there you are. And it's a total simple binary transition. Because you're already interpolating those simple shapes as a man, you do the same with the jump, you do the same with the behaviour, you do the same with everything. Everything is a symbolic representation. And in a way, it's much true to classic games, because chess, all these classic games, they're representations of things you can do and see in the real world, only by a set of rules. Yeah. The moment you look photorealistic, or as near as, the moment your face is infinitely detailed, and your body has all the correct limbs, do you know what I mean, and the correct points of articulation. If I press that button, and you just go, everything falls down, everything breaks. So what I'm saying is, the moment you look at a certain level of representation, everything else has to be brought up. Even your behaviour, even your artificial intelligence that's running you, it's all got to be brought up. Otherwise, it all crashes down really, really badly. And that brings another problem, in that games are about inputs. And in a game, you'll want your representation to do things that aren't even possible in the real world. Because, say you're in my game, you are a cop, a policeman, and you're trying to hunt the evil serial killer. But the camera, because I'm controlling you, is over your shoulder. The way I want you to move so that you don't get in the way of the camera, and so that I can clearly see the trajectory of the bullets into the kind of the killer as I'm trying to shoot him. You'll be doing things that no human would ever do. You know what I mean? And so we have to kind of create things that look figuratively realistic, and then make them do things that no man would ever do, but still try and patch it together so no one goes, that looks stupid.
What was going on in my head there, whilst listening to what you were talking about as the concerns, was the issue. There's issues like photorealism, and all of the stuff that it brings on, but the critical issue is the suspension of disbelief.
Absolutely,
that is
yeah.
That people do believe.
Yeah.
So, it's
for me, I always use the word, it's immersion. Immersion in the experience. For a game, that's all I'm interested in, and we use that term to judge nearly everything we're doing. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, another way of looking at it, it's just suspension of disbelief. We want to take the player into a world, make him forget he's holding a pad. And make everything seem coherent. It doesn't have to be realistic, but it's just got to be coherent.
So does HD stretch the limits of coherence? Is that one of the problems of it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's in terms of kind of like the production of stuff, it is very difficult. I mean, it all depends what you want to do. Say you're doing, you are doing a 2D game, very abstract, not trying to be figurative. It's just an absolute plus, no question, because the color, the shapes, there is no mosaic. You turn it on and you're like, wow, and it absolutely it aids in the immersion of the experience. And like, so some of those kind of like more old games with the kind of older mechanics and older forms of representation that are still being redone on HD, I think for that it's brilliant, and some of the best moments in HD gaming can come from that, where you're just like, yeah, I'm just getting what the artist intended me to get. But if you're doing a game which is very, very figurative, yeah, it just can break the sense of belief and immersion at every turn. And
well,
do you know what I
makes
mean?
me think the question arises here then. In what way? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to read it off the paper. In what ways has HD increased the pleasure of gameplay, or the converse, decreased the pleasure of gameplay?
Okay, well, so yeah, going back to what I said, like if you're doing something where there's some sort of like still some symbolism or abstraction away from the figurative world, I think it's just brilliant. Absolutely, no questions asked. And like I say, all I care about is immersion. Everything comes back to that. And so if you're doing a game where, supposing it's a game with, a lot of games about conflict, a lot of dramas about conflict, and say I'm doing a game where there's conflict, but I want to underscore the conflict. I want to make it have meaning, and so I want some emotional content, yeah? The fact that we can represent things in HD, the fact that we can represent things with such a level of complexity now, that we are kind of starting to, the concept of the uncanny valley. Do you know that concept? That the closer I get to reality, the more in computer generation, the more you go, oh, it's not quite real. You know what I mean?
Just for the future.
Yeah.
Explain.
Well, the uncanny valley is the idea that if I do represent you like simply in a chalk line drawing with two dots for your eyes and your mouth, people just understand it's a symbol, and they can buy into that and they can empathise with that. And that's fine. But if I kind of actually model you incredibly realistically, the more realistic I do it, it kind of creates a friction between my model and the actual realism of you. And like I think we're just getting to the point where either we're getting beyond that, or we're finding ways to just like tailor that object we're building so it's a coherent statement in itself, like a brilliant Greek sculpture. Do you know what I mean? It's not actually photoreal, but you just go, oh wow, that's a Venus de Milo. Apart from no arms, it looks totally real. Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't. It's a convincing whole, isn't it? And so like to give you more immersion because you want more emotion, you want more subtlety. I think it's part of that whole thing of being able to have more complexity in the models, more complexity in the scenes. And like, it is good, and we've used it to good effect. There are points in the recent games we've done where I've actually gone, yeah, that is as convincingly conveyed in a film. But in my project, the point of conveying that emotion is because then when the player is trying to stop that person being killed or womp on this bad guy, they actually really feel it. I mean, I was talking to somebody about yesterday. The example I used is, like, I love a kind of Oriental kind of combat cinema. The kind of technical, kind of balletic, and the choreographed nature of it, I always think is great. But when I saw the first Matrix, where they just ripped all of that stuff and put it into a Western film in a Western setting, the reason I really, really liked it was I really didn't want Keanu Reeves to be killed by Agent Smith, because I emotionally bought into it. And so, like, when I think of games, I think of the same kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? That kind of the choreography in that kind of Oriental stuff is like the gameplay, but with kind of higher definition and higher complexity in the models and the kind of like the ability to render the emotions to a greater extent. It's like bolting in the kind of like classic, kind of like Western script and the stuff that will make me care about it. So for that, it's great. For other things, if I'm doing a scene which has got immense complexity in it, like I want an army to come flooding across a valley towards you, because I'm not looking through the mosaic, that scene will be delivered at a much higher quality because I will be able to see the individual characters, and you know what I mean. It'll just be really, really good.
By mosaic, you mean the artifacts of the
yeah, absolutely. They're gone now, so you just go, that's great. In terms of,
so is there an issue of transparency with HD? In other words, there's no barriers to immersion. It's interesting, you're saying immersion equals emotion in a kind of way.
yeah, for me it does.
But there's this transparency of the medium, if you like, is helping in that goal?
In individual instances, but I don't think it has an over kind of global effect because all the other stuff having to be brought so far up to match it can undermine it. And I'll come on to that in a minute because games are very different from a lot of other mediums. But one of the key reasons it can undermine the pleasure in a game, I think, is just we are finding that just to make these objects, you know, the complexity has like tripled. Just in a really prosaic, boring, it takes 3 weeks to make something that took 1 week. And we are finding at the minute that to deliver some of this content at a very high standard throughout, it's very hard to make games that last 12 or 15 hours. And like, you know, we just go, yeah, it's good, but we just can't. If we're going to take 2 years, it's going to be that long. And that is obviously a problem. But games are different from film and television in that it's about immersion, it's about the experience, it's about the player input. And so that's the key thing that changes.
Tell me about, in the mix that you're talking about, duration is part of the gameplay. So you're looking for duration. And what extra function does you might have an exquisite game that's that long, but you need this duration to induce this other thing. What's this other thing?
Well, it's a really kind of operational, prosaic thing. It's just kind of value for money. It's just that kind of thing that if you went to the cinema and you went to see Spartacus and you were well up for an evening's entertainment and it lasted 10 minutes, do you mean you go, oh, you know, the content I'm getting doesn't fit the kind of overall surround I thought I was going to get it in?
Do you think the games will ever get to that point where an exquisite, expensive, short moment does the trick as opposed to the long, you know?
Not if I want someone to pay like £40 for it. Not really. Not really.
Okay, so the bottle of champagne, the 30 quid bottle of champagne doesn't work in games.
No, not at that kind of price point. I mean, things are splintering, and there are smaller products out there, but you know, the cost has got to be. It's that kind of really kind of stuff I'm not an expert in. Of like the 199 quid magic price point. Don't go into 200, otherwise your audience disappears, and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think it's the key. HD is, for me, it's got some brilliant things you can do with it. It can help me make my experience better, more immersive. It's got some key production problems, not just the fact that to make the objects of that sophistication takes more time, but like just things like storage, really prosaic things like that. You know, getting the images out, storing them somewhere, processing them, and then getting them back onto the box and holding them in the machine.
So current technology though can handle the level of complexity that you're outputting. The world of the kind of consumption end of stuff, it can handle all that, yeah.
Well, like we're working with the PlayStation 3 now, and that is designed to be a key component of like the kind of HD revolution for Sony with Bravia TVs and all this kind of stuff, and so it's very, very good. But the thing is, like, because we make the games for it, and you know, if my guys or we have a vision of something we want to do, there's quite a lot of freedom with like what bits of the machine we use. Yeah. So like, if my guys go, we want to accurately reenact World War II with everything that happens in it and every bit of detail, and every soldier's going to be in it, and we're going to have scenes with a million people on it. And I go, yeah, we're going to try and do that. You know, we will just eat into the machine's power to bring that thing about. And then we find that, like, we haven't left a lot to then be able to represent it at 1080. Do you see what I mean? We have a lot of leeway with how we can control those things. So, and we're always pushing, we're always, like the guys, you'll speak to some of these guys you're going to speak to, and everyone there, they're always pushing for more and more. And so it's never easy for us. So even though the machine is designed to be a core component of that HD revolution, we always struggle.
it's funny, you're hitting some of my questions here. How about this then? How has HD imagery affected the time it takes to produce a game? Does including HD significantly infringe on the time you take to make a game?
I mean,
Does
yeah.
that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the biggest clear visual signifier of a massive, you know, kind of overall change, evolution in games. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, we can have more complicated AI. We can throw around more people on screen. You know, we can get, you know, it's really kind of small things, but it's still important things. You know, we've got the space to have real music by real composers, and do you know what I mean? And create real worlds of a certain kind of scale, not just sets, but real big kind of areas. And with all of that, and with that kind of level of expectation, yeah, it comes great complexity, and it just takes more time. I mean, like, if I look over my career, it literally goes, my team sizes exponentially go up, and the time I take to make the games exponentially goes up as well. It doesn't come in. Whereas normally you go, okay, 10 people would take a year. Okay, if I have 20 people, maybe that takes 6 months. Do you know what I mean? But no, it's, you know, we've got, the first team I ever had was 18 people for a year. Then the next team I had was 32 people for 2 years, and then 80 people for 2.5 years. And for PlayStation 3, we've just had 120 people, not including all outside resources, for 3.5 years. Do you know what I mean? And it's just the complexity. And the trouble is, if you've got 180 lines on the screen and I can see everything, if the detail's not there, people do start to notice it. And the other trouble is, and it's really shows a lot in games, I think it's quite interesting. If you go back, like, you know, if I said to you, like, you know, do you remember Spartacus? Yeah. And you go, oh yeah, great film. And we could go around to my house and we could watch it with a few beers on a Sunday afternoon, and you know, and it would be pretty much as we remembered it. Yeah. If I said to you, oh, do you remember that great game Manic Miner? You know, we played it, you know, about 10 years ago, I think, mate. Let's go. You know, and we went round. And we'd turn it on and we'd go, my God, that is rubbish. Do you know what I mean? Look at it, because they just shot through the roof. And I do think that, like, and also because your mind fills in the details with that old kind of symbolic stuff, and even with, like, other forms of representation, when you see it, you just accept how it is and then fill the rest in. One of the things is that as we make these quantum leaps in graphics, people, they literally, they'll plug the game in, see it, and after 10 minutes, they just go, okay, yeah, that's what I thought it always looked like. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, you've got like a 10-minute window of wonder, and then people just get used to it, you know? And it's like if you get, you know...
Where do you see it going then? What's the next phase? Are we talking about more definition, or what are we looking at in the mix?
For games?
Yeah. For
games, I think, well, games have got like a kind of very multifaceted route. And the kind of key things that define games as a medium, you know, it's because you're representing an interactive experience. And I think the interactivity always trumps the kind of like the representation in the end, at core for what the medium is. So I think the future for games, and I think in some ways it will follow other mediums in some ways. The future for games will be more splintering. Like, cause like, you know, what interests me about kind of like film and TV and that kind of form of visualization is you've got people spending loads of money on a Bravia TV and buying loads of Blu-rays and enjoying that, and it's fantastic. And at the same time, they'll watch, you know, Casino Royale, enjoy that, and then they'll turn their computer on and go onto YouTube and really enjoy all the incredibly low-res little videos, and they'll send them to their mates, almost like signatures on their like emails, which are the letters of their time. And people, and so, like, I mean, the whole thing's splintering, you know, and into kind of different forms and different communications, and we're interacting with these mediums in vastly different ways. And games will do the same thing. You know, because you all have a mobile phone, that will be able to play games, and there will be different games from the games you play on your supercomputer underneath your TV. You will have, there will be wide-scale mass adoption of, you know, online. And online will bring different experiences to the mass market. You can see it, if you look over the history of games, if you look to the PC world, they're often doing interesting things in a kind of quite difficult to get into way that has a certain kind of audience that then transfers into a more kind of like user-friendly way onto the mass market consumer machines. I mean, just boring stuff like, you know, like 15 years ago, I would have never been allowed to make a first-person shooter, you know, where, you know, this is a gun there and you shoot all the guys, because that was viewed as just, that's just hardcore for the PC market. And then, woof, it's come through, and now it's one of the key staples of the consumer games experience. And like you can see now, what's happening is that kind of massively online stuff, like World of Warcraft, all those kind of things, they are starting to filter through into a mass market consumer experience. And that will be interesting, because I think it will change people's perception of how they interact with each other and with games. Do you know what I mean? And then the other things that will happen, one of the things we have found is that you can improve the graphics, but if the input is the same, if you're still bashing one button and broadly the same thing is happening in your experience, it's kind of like, well, that's not amazing. But we've done loads of things in previous years. We did iToy, where, you know, you had the camera and there was no controller and all the inputs were your hand. And it was a whole new kind of way of interacting, and people absolutely loved it. Nintendo have got the Wii, haven't they, which has kind of taken that to another kind of area, and people loved that as well. You know, there's going to be speech recognition, really kind of like high level. So, you know, in 10 years' time, you'll be able to have a game. This is kind of not rocket science. You'll be able to have a game where, you know, you start in some New York police precinct, and, you know, you walk down to the car and your guy says he's your new partner, and you sit in the car and you turn around and there'll be Samuel L. Jackson, and he'll look photorealistic, and he'll turn to you and he'll go, hi. And he'll go, hey, what's your name? And you'll say your name, and he'll go, hey, what do you want to do? Do you want to rob the bank, or do you want to stop the bank being robbed, or do you want to chase the killer? And you'll go, I think I chased the killer. And he'll go, great. And do you know what I mean? And so that'll be a great new experience, because it'll be a different interaction. So with games, it's interaction and methods of distribution, I think, that are slightly more key to the future of the medium than HD, I think. That's my current take on it at the moment.
So there's a proposition here with Marshall McLuhan, who said the medium is the message, and he very cleverly sort of worked out there was some kind of meaning to the mediums that we use, like
absolutely,
the phone line or whatever the hell it is. So my thought for you to kind of have a wrestle with is that if you had a simple function like sculpting in wood or sculpting in stone, then you've got to obtain the wood or the stone, you've got to shape it, you've got to polish it, you've got to oil it, you've got to present it. Then, if you take out the mix, the material itself, so you're only left with the process, is there a medium, is there a definition of the medium that you're working in digital terms, where the digitality of it starts affecting what you're doing? Where the processes start affecting what you're doing?
I don't quite follow the last bit of the question. So I'm making the...
Okay, so I'm trying to redefine this. The problem with digitality is that there isn't a blooming medium. There isn't a piece of wood. There isn't a piece of tape. There isn't a film. But there are definitely processes, right? A series of processes that you turn the computer on.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mess with all that stuff. Now the thing
I think you've hit upon it.
Oh,
I think. Because I do subscribe to that, the medium is the message kind of stuff, that, like, you know, the format and the structure of how the content is delivered to you, you know, can have some kind of effect aside from what the content is. You know what I mean? And it will have an effect and change the way they interact with each other and the way they interact with the world. I think that's true, and you can see it I can see it in my staff, I can see it in my kids, you can just see it. And I think that, like, high definition, low definition, digital representation, I think, and there are I've got some caveats against this as well, so I'm not some kind of, like, you know, crazy dictator for this kind of stuff, but I think the medium is actually the computer. It's the computer. It's the computer, and it's the binary technology, and it's the internet. You know, and that's shaping. That kind of thrust in technology is shaping how we view and consume stuff, and like, really, you know. So I could, like, for instance, I got the other day the most fantastic bit of high definition footage from Japan. I had it on my PlayStation, and it was one of the best moments I've ever had with HD. It was this Japanese girl, it was kind of pop video, and she was singing, yeah, and you could see every hair on her head. You could see the tiny hairs on her upper lip. You could see every leaf out of the window. You know what I mean? And the whole thing just went bang in your face, yeah. And it was like when you go to the National Gallery and look at a Rembrandt, and then you go out into the street and you see the world brighter and sharper and more new. And I thought this is the greatest thing ever. And that was really, really powerful and really good. But at the same time, it was still being delivered to me on a kind of like, you know, a computerized machine in a new format, and changing the way I view the world and my experiences and how I interact with my family, with my friends, how I communicate with them. So I kind of, my feeling on it, and it's not something that like I could write you an essay on right now, it's just something I've been slowly thinking about as we've got to, I guess, the era of kind of PlayStation gaming, PlayStation 3 gaming, is that it's the computer that is really shaping the way we interact as a species with each other. Because Marshall McLuhan, he was that kind of thing. Like it was the advent of the printing press that changed how people reacted, wasn't it? And like, you know, suddenly, you know, the communication was more kind of like, you know, less oral and more kind of like follow linear sequences of information down a page. And it's the computer that is the massive thrusting change in how we interact. I mean, you know, we are being, it's like a million fascinating things are happening, aren't they? I mean, that kind of notion of individuality and individual taste. You know, every time I go to Amazon and I go, oh, I'm interested in that new album by the Rolling Stones, and you click on it, I wonder how much that's going to cost, and it goes, people who like this album also bought these. You might like this, and you might like. Do you know what I mean? You're going, my God, you can itemize and categorize my soul. Do you know what I mean? You know, and it's, all these interesting things are happening. And like, of course, there's people behind the design of all that kind of stuff. But for me, that's gonna be HD is a window onto that world, I think. But it's the computer that will be the next shifting of how people interact. So I agree with his medium is the message, but at the same time, like I do hear what you're saying. There have been moments when you are just seeing something really great in HD, where it is just like looking at a brilliant painting, and you do just, it has that same kind of like effect when you go back out into the street and you see. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, maybe you can help me with this, because I don't know what it is. You can look at a great bit of HD, and you can go out. And like say, if I had come from my office and I'd just seen that thing and I was looking at your face, I'd be going, wow, look at the face, you know, wow. But also, you can work theoretically or conceptually on ideas with people, and like, you know, in a total theoretical world. And but you know, creatively your mind is going, and then you can go out into the street and the same thing can happen. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not sure what this is all totally speculative, but that's my kind of crazy, worthless views on it. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? So you can wipe it off the tape.
No, it's great. It's great. Right. Is there? I mean, of course, I've got my own theories, but that's not why I'm here. It's really your thing. I mean,
but I think that's the big thrust. But yeah, still, sometimes I go, well, that's just that's work. It's almost like a piece of art in its own right. It's just a head represented so fantastically.
There's something about clarity.
Yeah, the clarity of it, the realness of it. You know,
and yet, so we're sitting opposite each other in real time, looking at each other. This is represented not as such, but here we are, and yet that wow ow moment isn't quite there. Why is it that representation of an image, and thinking of gaming too, why is it that representation has that function? What's happening in that mix, and why is this increased definition over the old standard definition doing that? Is it just because it's different and it's better?
Well, that's kind of Marcel Duchamp, isn't it? The moment you put a frame on something, you're forced to focus on it and analyse it and look at it in a different kind of way. So it's partly that you're making an object out of it and asking you to consider it. I think that would probably be the main reason, I think. And also because when you're in the real world, I think, you know, part of your mind is, I mean, it's funny, I was discussing this with someone today. We're doing our new meeting room setup, yeah. And I was saying to the IT guys, like, it's got to be one button. It's got to work on one button. They said, why? Can't we get a bit more complicated than that? I said, no, one button. I said, because when you go in there to give a speech, your entire brain is just going, what am I going to say? What am I going to talk? Are my flies done up? Do you know what I mean? So like, I can do it normally, but I just got to go, and it's got to work. And I think so. A lot of that is when you're in the real world, like we're talking, communicating, we're in an active kind of like relationship. When you're walking down the street, half of your brain is steering you through the thousands of people so you don't bump into them. And so like when you put a frame on it and say, look at that, this is art, this is something you can look at. And in that situation, you're the dominant guy looking at a piece of art. It's kind of like a quiet environment. Your brain can focus on it. I guess your brain's got time to kind of go, do you know what I mean? Take stock of it.
Taking stock.
Yeah, I think so. Because that's what it is, isn't it? It's a window, isn't it? Look at that, look at that. It's like being an editor. I've chosen you to show you that, or that, or that. That'd be my take on it. But yeah, it's an interesting area. Well, you disagree with Marshall McLuhan, do you? You think it's, or...
No, I think the guy is very spot on. It's just that I've heard denials lately about how digitality is actually no medium at all, because everything's represented as a piece of maths, so the medium is left behind, and I don't totally buy that. I don't buy that there is no medium. I just think it's very subtle, and it may be in 20 years' time we can see what the medium is. There are people absolutely in denial of that at the moment.
Represented by maths?
Well, I mean, you know, you've got input devices into a computer, whether they be scanners or sound or whatever the hell they are, and the first thing that happens is a piece of binary kind of maths is happening to represent it into that realm. And what you guys are doing, it seems to me, is that you are taking the sheer material of that realm, the sheer mass of it, albeit through Maya or 3D Max or whatever the hell the manipulation is, but you're actually manipulating the code, and that's the interesting thing for me in terms of like the Matrix and all of that. Actually, you're dealing in the code, and listening to you talking, what's really interesting to me is you're talking about creating worlds where if you want an orc army to come over, you're bloody going to have one. That's quite wonderful in a way. It's sort of godlike.
I'd kind of refute that kind of theory anyway on more than, I guess, on two levels. Firstly, like you know the Renaissance artist Piero della Francesca, like he gave up and became a mathematician, didn't he? Do you know what I mean? And like, who's to say that any of these great kind of like figures, if they were here now, instead of like painting with oils on a canvas, wouldn't be trying to write incredibly fantastic representational algorithms for transferring me through that camera onto the screen? Do you know what I mean? I mean, look at Vermeer, look at how long they use a box cam, a pinhole camera. Do you know what I mean? They're interested in that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like an insult to all mathematicians or all people who have a technical bent. There's a lot of artistry in making that camera work really well. And on top of that, we see it a lot here. We sometimes get raw data from the world, like say mocap, yeah? We've got a man in a suit, covered in little balls, cameras everywhere. We're going to absolutely, intrinsically get all that raw data utterly accurately, and we do. The number of times we had a guy who's like, we've had Brad Pitt's stunt double. Oh, it's going to be great. He's slightly twisted his ankle. Do you know what I mean? It totally comes through, and it looks, we can't use it, And so we get the raw data absolutely fantastically. If we don't have the kind of technology to translate that raw data, i.e. if the skeleton we put it on is not good enough, if the setup on the kind of the face we've made is not good enough, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You just get rubbish. And so there's a massive amount of artistry in just translating that data. And even if we get the data absolutely figuratively correct, and it's as much of a transposition as you sitting there onto the screen and we're totally happy with it, we then go in and play around with it and tweak it all the time. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of, I think there is some sort of artistry in all these kind of things. I don't know many people who have. We've never done a game where we haven't kind of colour corrected or tinted every kind of shot or frame, or do you know what I mean? Or even even where you point the camera is an element of artistry, isn't it? And a decision. And do you know what I mean? So like, where are they? Let's have a fight with them now. These guys are wrong. Do you know what I mean? Where you point something is massively important, isn't it? So. And how you cut it together as well.
So it's the issue of Duchamp about what you show, and then it's the issue of how you show it.
Absolutely.
So the is about, at the current moment, is about how you're showing it.
Yeah.
And all its problems.
But I think Yeah, no, it's an art form. It's good. It's good. Sorry, that's not a very good comment. Sorry, what's the next question?
No, no. I think we've actually done them actually.
Did that make any sense whatsoever? Because like, I just kind of dropped straight into it without any time to prep and.
No, no, it's fine. It's fine.
okay.
It's about wrestling. It's very important for me that we actually have a little bit of wrestling on screen with the ideas, because if you just prepped up, then it's just more of the same.
Absolutely, absolutely.